clap.
Hola humanos, welcome to our ipsicafé scoping series where we take an idea and scope it in live in real time, 1 hour at a time. My name's Alejandra, I'm a strategist and community organizer, and
Hi, I'm Lizzie, a project strategist and a systems thinker.
the first idea we are scoping under this series is to create a blueprint that allows us to intentionally build and interweave our networks so we can strengthen our communities and more effectively translate people power into structural change making power.
Yeah, and a quick recap of what we have done so far in this series is based on the purpose of the project and seeing it as a system, we started with a general brainstorming with the bubbles method that we use. This is a free flow of ideas to bring to the surface all the elements that we think or know may be part of that system. And each bubble represents an element, an idea. And to help us with the brainstorming process, we used the 5W and H framework, and that is a critical thinking tool that we use asking what, who, where, when, why, and how. And the more questions, the more ideas. After we thought we have captured all the elements that came to mind, we completed a categorization process, and so far we have we identified 6 categories: humans yellow, areas of interest in green, core values foundation purple, blueprint development, which is this project's development, in orange, the blueprint output, which will be the project's results, blue, and barriers to the system, gray. We started interconnecting all the systems elements, which are a critical part of systems thinking. And we have worked the interconnection of pretty much all the groups, with the exception of the barriers, which we are going to do today. And with that, we want to ensure that this process talks to you and makes sense to you, because if you understand it, you can explain it and execute it. So now I pass to Alejandra.
All right, without anything else, let's continue scoping. So as we always do, I'm gonna put the time at the top so we can accurately track the details of our project and our progress. And today is May 22nd, and it is 11:12 local time.
May 18.
Oh.
Yes, some days ahead.
May 18. I don't know what I was thinking. And it's 11:12 current time in the Netherlands. So we'll note that there, and we're doing connections. We can see the tracking of our time so far. We spent about 50 minutes brainstorming. That was one session. We did 2 sessions categorizing. It's around 2 hours. And then we've done around almost 3 hours of connections, which tends to be the most time-intensive section of the process of analyzing the information.
And very critical, because this is how you manage all the interdependencies and all the how everything is connected, because in a system, everything must be connected.
All right, so let's get to it. We can see all the connections currently, and we have at the top, these are the bubbles that are not connected that we're gonna try to place today. And we're also gonna probably do a little review of the connections as they exist right now to make sure they all make sense and that they're feeding the different elements that they're supposed to. So right now, we have what others have done as essentially the start of this project. One thing that we observed is that it has arrow feeding into it, which makes it difficult for it to be the start of the project. So we were gonna go ahead and change that to a unidirectional arrow into problem identification, and showing that this is the start of this project. So essentially it's going to be some research. But where shall we continue on?
I would like to bring the gray categories, like it's the barrier to the system. And they I'm thinking here out loud. I think they are like in certain way a parallel to the making space, like also going to the blue. The blue is the blueprint outputs, and the gray color represents barriers to the systems, barrier to a particular networking, if we have competitiveness, if we have people that take space instead of making space, or if we have exclusion.
Should we think maybe it's part of the contextual analysis? Or no?
It, it could be, but also could be part of the
And they're not necessarily like
group dynamics.
Well, let's look at them as we have them.
Yeah. Because in contextual analysis, we have what is needed, what others have done in regards to, you know, the existing systems, infrastructures, institutions, and so I think they are more part of a dynamics of a group, or conditions that we want to evaluate as a whole to prepare the blueprint, like we did for making space, for example. We have there several features: inclusion, accessibility, humility, understanding of diversity. So that's what I think, like the gray is like the anti-purple, right? I mean, because the purple is the core values, our foundation, and the grays are the things that would interrupt those values, or would clash with the values, if you will.
Yeah. Do you think they should be all in one bubble, kind of how we've made the making space one as barriers, or do you think we can sort of sprinkle them throughout if there's like different barriers at different points?
I like the idea. I like the idea of grouping them as we did purple, but when you mentioned that if we, you know, sprinkling them also could work. And this is something important that I mentioned when I was doing the recap, that this has to make sense for the owners of the process. So everybody will manage this differently, but if you understand it and it makes sense to you, that's okay. For example, if we grab taking space, that could be something of the group dynamics, depending on what we are evaluating there.
So here, because we put it in gray, I think it would be the barriers to taking space.
Yes.
Right.
And that's what taking space for me is like. I don't know, maybe this is it's gonna reveal my age. It's like Superman and Luxor. I don't know if it was Luxor or the person. Lex Luthor.
Combining person.
That is the anti, right? There's a name. I don't remember the name.
Of the antagonist?
The antagonist. So the gray for me is the antagonist of that purple of making space. So we could do that and it will make sense.
Well, because I don't see taking space as necessarily the antagonist of making space, in the sense that I see it as what are the barriers people are facing in taking space, not necessarily the act of taking space as a negative, or as taking away from other people's space. Just what barriers people might be facing in this context to taking space in these particular. That's why I was thinking, same with underrepresentation and exclusion. Taking space seems like it could be part of the contextual analysis, like what barriers people are facing in these existing systems, structures, and institutions that leads to underrepresentation, that leads to exclusion, and that leads to, say, the inability to take up significant space or be able to have change-making power in those spaces.
Yeah, I see where you're going. Yeah, I see it too, like, you know, that you can find that could be dynamics that you want to work to, because you may find them, right? You may have a community where you're going to have indeed competitiveness because it's part of the human being. You could have
competitive
underrepresentation by default because it's a social construct, something that, you know, that there are people that are not represented, there are going to be exclusion. So that's what I was seeing it to. as a group of elements that.
I think competitiveness, I see it as part of the group dynamics, something that needs to be thought of or considered when a group, because if we see it, that the group dynamics comes after buy-in. So you've already consolidated a group in some way. And I think that's why I see the competitiveness as something that needs to be dealt with within that group in order to be able to work towards that common goal, whatever that might be. But the other three, these three I see more as part of the contextual analysis because they're more external barriers, I see. That might be impacting the group, whereas competitiveness I see could be like individuals within the group, and that could be a barrier to that collaboration and cooperation.
And how about emotional intelligence?
That's why it's floating over there. I don't know where to put it.
Because it could be also part of the group dynamics.
Yeah, or even perhaps the group. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even like value alignment. But yeah, maybe group
because
dynamics.
it's something that could be a skill, is something that you have, right?
But it can also be developed, I think.
Yeah. That you have either because it's innate or because you develop it. But it's more like that type of skills. It's a skill, but we put it separate because it's really critical here.
I'm gonna pop them in there for now.
Yeah, and then here maybe we want to put those three like in a bubble, like we did for making space or value alignment, and maybe we want to put external barriers there.
And one thing that's good to remember is that these are elements that came during a brainstorm. They're not exhaustive. So the reason why sometimes we have the external barriers as a bigger bubble or contextual analysis or group dynamics, it's because once we're working this project, once we're done with the planning and we're actually working on the project, we want to consider at a bit higher level. There might be some aspects of contextual analysis that we didn't think of that go beyond the 4 elements that we have inside this bubble. Same with group dynamics. There might be other aspects of group dynamics that need to be considered that are not just these bubbles. And with external barriers, same thing. There might be other external barriers that we want to consider that are not here represented, but because we have this external bubble, we have that opportunity at a later time to discuss not just underrepresentation, but discuss external barriers as a whole, and other things might come up.
Yeah, and this is something, if I just like breaking down something, and I'm going to bring again the concept of clothes. So we have in clothing, we can say like the big item, clothing. And when we prepare the bubbles at the beginning, when we started the brainstorming, we throw everything there. I mean, you just throw all the clothes that you can think of on the floor, right? There's no categorization, there's no hierarchy. So you just put them there, and then we categorize them. Oh, okay, all the tops, all the bottoms, all the underwear. And then, but on the tops, we may want to separate that in more. So that's when you could have, maybe you said underwear and socks, and you have one big bubble with tops, and maybe you only have 2 pants, and then you don't have a big bubble for the 2 pants. So that's what you can see. Like, I don't know if you want to scroll up a little, like in the yellow and the orange, they are more individual because they were pretty much like the same level of category, but in the blues and the purples, we see that we can break those down more. And you will see the process as we move forward with this series.
Precisely. And let's think about how we're connecting these external barriers. Because for group dynamics, for example, we just did a connection to the bigger bubble, but contextual analysis, we have connections within. I think because we initially didn't have this overarching contextual analysis bubble, but how do we want to
I
connect?
think with the existing systems and structures and institutions, the external barriers, there's like a one line from the existing systems, because those barriers come from existing structures
Yeah.
already. So it is a one-way arrow from there to the barriers. Now the next question would be, what do we do with that? Because what we are doing here, all these arrows mean if the input of something, what, let's say, let me see one, that all the big bubble of contextual analysis will inform the group to buy in. So what do we do with the gray?
Okay, and this one is not bidirectional.
No, it's not right. It
unidirectional.
is unidirectional.
So once we analyze the existing systems, structures, and institutions, we can identify what external barriers
there are
have come out of that. Okay, so as Lizzie was saying, everything needs, unless it's the beginning or the end of the project, it needs, it's either the input or the output into something. So we have external barriers. It has an input, and then it should go into something. So would that go into, it wouldn't go into buy-in directly.
It wouldn't.
The barriers themselves, not necessarily. Well, I don't see them necessarily going into that. Perhaps into what others have done.
That's what I was gonna say. Perhaps, yeah, actually, yes, because what others have done in regards to exclusion or in regards to underrepresentation, and then you can feed that there, and with that, right, and it is just right there, and then the whole thing is already looped, so you already have inputs and outputs in the whole thing, because that will feed what others have done, if feed back and forth with similar methods, and then you get
the contextual analysis as
the contextual analysis as a whole,
which then gives you the opportunity to have people buy into the process.
Correct.
With this context in mind.
Correct.
All right. What else do we have floating around?
We have, let's grab that global interconnection and mutual aid. Global interconnection. This is, we were talking about, because core values and foundation, we know that there's a big world out there, right? And we may want to work with groups from all over the world. That was the idea originally.
Well, I think in terms of trying to design a blueprint that can be applied by different groups in different contexts, we need to consider kind of the global context, right? We can't have a very narrow perspective of something that would work in this particular geographic area or in this particular group and think it can be broadly applied to everyone else. So I was thinking in maybe connected to who is doing this, because this yellow part is essentially the other humans that are going to inform this process, that are going to help us with the research, the understanding of not only being able to create a blueprint like this, but also being able to understand why a blueprint like this doesn't exist in the way that we envision it, in a way that is accessible to broad swaths of people. What do you think, connecting it to this? What did you have in mind?
I was looking at that more towards the logistics and operations, but I was missing that point of view that you just brought up.
Maybe even from problem identification, or like even for what others have done. I feel like in the very beginning, trying to understand and trying to bring in that global lens from the beginning.
And again, yeah, this is for the project, yes.
Because the output, the blueprint itself doesn't have to be applied on a global scale.
Correct.
It can be something at a local
very,
level.
Yeah, very small.
So it doesn't, So I don't think the global aspect needs to be part of the blueprint itself, but I think it needs to be a consideration of our work in designing the blueprint. So do you think part of the...
Yeah, for the part when I was talking about the blue, it's because when we put like in the group dynamics, we will need that, but we have it like in the formats of interaction, the time zones. So we already covered that a little bit of that. We are recognizing that there could be people out of our local world, right? So yeah, let's put it there, like being informed or informing. Also the problem identification, I think, because that will help. So from what others have done, and then
like from what others have done into the global?
Yes. And then that will help with the problem identification. Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
And these things, or after this particular process that we are doing today, we are going to go to what is the work breakdown structure, and it would be a draft, and that could change some of these interconnections that we have here. So this is all, right now it is getting some good shape, but the shape is not definite, right? So there's no fear, like if we say like, oh, we believe it's here, because like you have seen or you have heard, Alejandra and I could think, oh, I think this could be here or could be there, but at the end of the day we are going to draft this, and then we are going to have a final output that only makes sense to the owner of the project. And we repeat that a lot because there's not one way to do it. It's what every group has, the logic for every project or for every project personnel. So for mutual aid,
I think mutual aid, trying to consider it, or the way I think was initially thinking, is in how this blueprint will work to support the group, to mutually benefit and support the people that are within it. So I think I'm thinking about it in terms of group logistics and operations. What do you think?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, we can put it in here for now. And like Lizzie said, none of this is set in stone. So there are, this is just a way to process information. And at different times, it can surface that different things better fit in different spaces. And as you work through the information, processing and analyzing it, you gain more clarity about how different elements fit together. So I think I'm going to add, because mutual aid can have a very specific meaning. So I'm going to add support. It's not just about...
And this is something that, it has come to us with the expertise, or because we have done so many of this, that why will you have something that belongs to a different category in a blue category? And this is because there are, this is a core value, it's a foundation that we have established as a support, right? So when we break this down, we could have the interconnection of this mutual aid to the particular blues. but it is right now we see it like, hey, this is part of our operations and that's how we want it. But because we have it in a different category, we keep it there to identify the connection between two separate segregated items. So the last ones that we have up there, coordinating a multiplier effect.
I'm seeing multiplier effect as perhaps part of how they are doing it, and thinking about the different, this yellow category, we're gonna find not only different organizers, different people who are kind of doing this work in their context. Part of what we want to figure out is how not only they multiply it, but how we can also create something that can be multiplied in its effect. But I don't know which direction this would go. I think a lot of this, these arrows, if you just come into this visual, it can be very confusing. But if you watch from the beginning how we went about connecting the different elements, it makes sense. And it also highlights how this process is not linear. You don't start from the left and you move to the right. You can see that even though we start with what others have done, and from there identify a problem, we also move through all of these elements, yellow, get to how are they doing it, and then that arrow goes back and helps us identify or validate essentially the problem that we previously identified. So that's why this process is so important to do these connections, because it's not, you don't grab an element, consider it, and then move on. Sometimes you need to consider it and essentially build a hypothesis, and then do more research, talk to more people, and go back and make sure that you identified or that problem correctly, or that definition that you made still makes sense.
Yeah, and can you scroll down or just zoom out a little? And you could think, oh, this is going into a loop, but it's not. It's a feedback loop. It is in systems thinking, we have that. It's a feedback loop that you are always feeding with information of learning, and then you have that. Right now we have problem identification. Maybe, I don't know if we want to do that right now. We're going to have a problem validation that will come.
I mean, I think this arrow could be fed into a new problem validation bubble.
I would like that, because it would
help close that, or like
right,
help the continuity. And then where does that go?
It will go to the AOKs because
instead of this one.
Instead of that one, correct. So maybe we put it on the right of how are they doing it. Multiplier effect fits multiplier effect, and multiplier effect feeds problem validation.
And then
we would have to come back to come down to the blueprint outputs, and green and blue. Let's see where. I'm not sure. Or I think maybe, or just leave it like you had it, but instead of problem identification, we put problem identification / validation. Because when we get to validation, it's done, right? I don't think it's necessary. So yeah, take it like you had it before, and just let's call that problem identification / validation. Because with that, you can modify your plans, right? you're going to modify and you're going to have your final.
And did you want it from how are they doing it or from multiplier effect? Or both?
I think for multiplier effect would be fine. Yes. And from that, it goes. This is something I think we're missing something for connecting to the bottom part from the orange.
Yeah, I think essentially from the research and the information gathering that we're going to do once we kick off the project into moving from research to actual development.
Yes, so we need something.
I think this arrow in particular from the AOKs has been bothering me because it feeds sort of into nothingness.
No, just move that to the blue, to the Start Blueprint application. Because that will be the planning for your output.
So you don't think it should feed into this part?
No.
Into the research?
No, all that research will inform my plans, I think.
But wouldn't this be the beginning of our project? In a lot of ways? Or does it still come? I think it still does inform, because it informs, you know, how are we defining these how we're going about developing the blueprint, how we're going about doing the research, how we're going about defining who the humans are that we're going to contact. There is a level of planning, which is what this orange bubble represents, that I think does need to go there. But it doesn't mean that this can't.
I think I don't think, because we start with the most knowledgeable people. This what is there, who is doing it. We are evaluating all that. For me, that planning comes afterwards. So all that information will inform your planning, and that planning will inform your execution. So, yeah. Does that make sense?
I think so.
And then I would perfect. That now, because you are continuing once that you have the problem validated, then you go back planning.
Into okay, and then we can move.
And of course, with the identification, you can start doing some pre-planning. Obviously.
But the validation also.
But the validation validates the planning, and then with that, then you come and you start with your
designing of this blueprint application.
Correct. Okay. That closes the loop. That right there.
Okay, we still have this floating
coordinated
blue bubble, which I think I feel like it's part of group logistics operations. It's like how this whatever project comes out of this, whatever mutual effort is being done, it needs to be coordinated somehow. So for me, it fits within this bubble, but what do you think?
Well, if it refers to the coordination of the operations, yes, right?
Are you considering it could be referring to something else?
No, we can put it there, and then when we do the WBS, we will see if it was something. I think you're right. It's just operations. Is there anything else that is floating around?
I don't think so, but let's have a zoom out and take a look. I think we can do the whole trajectory and see. Okay, so we start. This one doesn't have an input, which means it's our starting element, which is essentially doing research about what others have done. And we're trying to figure out, because we know that there are people who are building and interweaving communities all around the world. We want to learn what that looks like, and also inform the problem identification of why not everyone knows how to do that, right? Why that's not, even though there are people all over doing that, it seems like it's not as accessible, or at least in our perspective, as accessible as it could be. So trying to identify from what others have done or are doing, what is the problem or the issue that comes up when we're thinking about being able to replicate these efforts or being able to model efforts after these.
Yeah, and I want to bring something. I may be getting ahead of myself, but for example, when we start with the what others have done or what have others done, the research process, we are talking at a high level, right? Because many times we see people that want to start putting details on what that means, and this is something that we will do later. For example, what have others done? What have others done? So then we start breaking it like research. We want to do research of what type, or how do we do it, and then how we okay, we are going to evaluate certain papers from certain universities, from the libraries, from internet. So the details is not what we are talking about here. We are talking about the big research, because sometimes we have worked this type of process with people and they start getting too much into the weeds at this level. So I want you to see every one of these bubbles is a very high level bubble that will be broken down later in the process.
Okay, so what others have done will inform our ability to identify what the problem is, in terms of creating a blueprint like this that has the ability to be applied in different contexts. And it also informs, does it inform the global? This is where it doesn't necessarily inform, but we want to consider,
right?
Consider on a, not just in our specific context, but we want to think globally, because there are so many different types of communities and all around the world in different contexts. We want to make sure that we are looking at what others have done in all of these contexts, or as many as we can. I also kind of want to connect what others have done to communities, but I don't know if I'm overcomplicating these, because I feel like all of these can also help inform.
But we have it in the yellow because we have a loop there, right? So it is being
it comes
worked
in later.
right?
Okay. So others have done, we want to look at from a global perspective, identifying the problem and the other connection.
I will link it. I will
what?
link it to because that's how you do it, right? When you're saying who's already doing this, that line between yellow, because this is us as a project management, we start like that, and we can have certain input, but now we could have certain information about other communities. But when we come with the experts that are creating the blueprint, we can have more detail on that.
Okay, so we do want to connect it?
I would connect it.
Okay.
It makes absolute sense.
Okay, and then global interconnection will also help us identify the problem, because different contexts will help surface that. and then we go into essentially what's going to be the planning of our project. And we use the 10 AOKs, which are the areas of knowledge as defined by the Project Management Institute, which is an international body that defines project management standards. And it just helps kind of structure a project in a way that considers an overview of all of these general aspects. So we're going to start, once we have identified the problem, we can have a bit of planning around how we're going to pursue that project. And then we move into, once we have identified the problem, then we want to identify, because we don't know that much, and we are project people, we want to identify who are the experts in this case, who are the most knowledgeable people, or MKPs. To be able to identify that, and also looking at our existing networks, which are quite vast in terms of industry, in terms of geography, in different communities, who can we talk to within those spaces that are already doing this, and that can help us figure out how people are connecting, how people are already organizing and interweaving their communities in order to achieve these structure institutional changes that they're looking for. From there, we identified that these could be change makers, it could be community organizers, could be academics. And as we mentioned before, this is not an exhaustive list. There is going to be other people. When we're looking at who is already doing this categories will expand. There will be other people that come into this, but these are the ones that came up during our brainstorm. And we'll discuss with these people, and not only will we discuss what they're doing, but also specifically how they're doing it, because that's part of what we're trying to figure out. How they're doing what they're doing in their communities, and then how they're multiplying, what effect, how are they going about multiplying
their impact,
their efforts, and their impact on a broader scale. And then, as we mentioned, this will help us validate the problem that we initially identified. Understanding how different people are working in different contexts can shed light into what it is specifically that makes it so difficult to create something that can work in different contexts. And then that will help us improve that initial plan that we had made about how to go about developing this blueprint, and feed us into the beginning of this blue category, which is going to be the design of the blueprint itself. One part that I skipped, that is a connection that comes earlier when we were talking about who is already doing this, is the connection to this larger green bubble that we titled communities. And it's essentially different areas around which people already organize. We see people already organizing around religion, their culture, different interests, affinities, the industry that they work in, all sorts of reasons. So having those different categories to draw upon or think about can help us get a broader image of not only how people organize, but how people affect change. From there, we can understand or have a better insight into how people build shared understanding. And then again, it feeds into the beginning of what we've defined as the blueprint itself. Do you want to discuss these other connections, or no? All right, I'll keep going. So we've seen, as we mentioned, once we validate the problem and refine our plan, then that also feeds into being able to design the blueprint itself. And when we're talking about the blueprint itself, we're looking at essentially different phases of its application. We're looking at the start of the blueprint application, which will come usually from some sort of shared reality, some shared motivation. It can be informed by the shared understanding or this previously gathered community. but it also can be for other reasons. So that in and of itself can be the start. And from there, we want to, as we're designing this process, we want to make sure that we're considering the idea of making space. Because if we're trying to build a community, we're trying to interweave our community with others, we want to make sure that we're not just creating space for ourselves, but we're making space for others. For us, that right now came up as thinking about accessibility, thinking about inclusion, thinking about humility, and an understanding of diversity beyond our own reality. But that can also encompass other things that we want to make sure that we are thinking about as we're designing, not only as we're designing this blueprint, but also as a component of the blueprint itself. From there, we move into being able to conduct some sort of contextual analysis. So really understand what context this group is operating under. So as we mentioned, this group has some sort of shared reality, shared identity that they already have. But there is a broader context that we all exist under that further impacts or informs that perspective. So in order to truly understand what that context is, we need to be able to identify what the needs of the individuals and the group as a whole are, what existing systems and structures or institutions this group is operating under, or what systems and structures are impacting this group, and as a result, what external barriers are created because of these existing systems and structures. That can also, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel when we're trying to organize or we're trying to affect change, we want to understand, given this context, these structures and these barriers, what others have done in the past in order to address some of these things, as well as what methods they've implemented in order to operate in this reality. Now, from this contextual analysis, we're able to get buy-in from different people. Perhaps from that shared reality, there are people who already buy in to this shared effort, but some might need more contextual understanding. So that's why different arrows inform the buy-in process. And then from there, we have this broader bubble that is group dynamics, because once you have a consolidated group of individuals that are coming together in order to pursue a common goal, then there needs to be sort of an understanding of what the dynamics of this group might be. So it might be a group that is already operating together, already working together in some way, or it might be a group that is newly consolidated. So understanding things like what different communication styles are present, what skills are present within the group, what assets, what the availability of people's times are, because in order to create a realistic project, one has to understand what not only what labor needs to be put into, but also what people are able to put into something. So a new effort. So this might be, this group might have big aspirations of something that might take way more work than people are currently able to take on. So that means that, well, maybe it's broken down into smaller efforts in order to account for the availability that people have to dedicate to it. And as you're building this group and understanding these dynamics, I think a portion of value alignment needs to come into it, where not only you understand the realities of how people operate, but also what values you're all operating under. We have emotional intelligence under values too. So I think understanding within this group what non-negotiables are in terms of values is really important, because initially we mentioned like the purple bubble was kind of what Lizzie and I are considering as part of our values. So it's not necessarily that these are necessary to incorporate into everyone who applies this blueprint, but the idea that there needs to be some alignment in terms of values in order to be able to collaborate and work together toward that that shared outcome. And then once you have an understanding of the dynamics and you're aligned in values, then there comes the reality of working as a group, what we've titled group logistics and operations, so that it takes into account, all right, what is shared definitions, what is it that we are working for, make sure that everyone has a clear understanding of what those reasons are and what that looks like, what skills are available to the group and how the labor can be distributed, what resources are available, what processes are going to be used in order to carry out this effort, how is it going to be coordinated, how often you're communicating, how is the group mutually supporting everyone within it. And that will ideally lead to what we consider the primary project deliverable for this project that we're mapping out here, which is a blueprint as a decision tree. So something visual that helps the group carry out whatever effort it is that they're looking to carry out.
Not only a decision tree. I mean, we put several ideas there. It could be a board game, or it could be a roadmap.
Yeah.
So different ways to visualize it.
Yeah, something that facilitates carrying out this effort. It could be, I guess I meant like a decision aid, something that will help move along. And like Lizzie said, it can be a decision tree, it can be a visual in terms of a board game, a map, whatever works for. And it might not be a visual at all. It might just be something that can represent this mutual understanding, effort, and purpose that this group has gathered to achieve. I guess that...
Yeah, the beauty of the visuals is that people, the way that we have done roadmaps before or board games, is that people can see where they are in the board. Let's say it's a board game, and how they support the overall project. So when you know how your grain of sand collaborates with the project development, you feel you have more ownership, and you have not only the accountability, but you feel that you are a little bit of an owner, even if it's just in a tiny bit. So that's what the visuals are really great, more than a big document.
Yeah, and the only reason I mentioned that it might not be a visual is thinking, for example, of people whose vision might not be their primary sense through which they so that's kind of what I was thinking. It can take other formats that adapt to the community who's
thank you for bringing the inclusion right there.
So yeah, and that you see does not have an arrow into anything else, because essentially that is the end of this project. That is, as we defined at the top left, that is the blueprint that we are looking to create.
Yeah, so if you zoom in, that we can see the whole thing. One of the important things that Ali has mentioned, start and end. When we see something that doesn't have an arrow coming in or coming out, is because it's the start or the end. If we find out that there's something that is not connected, there's a gap, unless that you can have a subproduct somewhere else, which could happen, right? You could have, let's say that if you have this in phases, if you have an output that doesn't connect to anything else later because it's an output, fine, that's an output, but it has to be a conscious output or a conscious input. So most likely when something doesn't have a connection in or out, if they are not the beginning or the end, there's a gap, and we have to find what is causing the gap. So that's one of the beauties of the interconnected systems. Yeah. You can realize what your gaps, and because the gaps are going to generate a risk somewhere.
Exactly. No part of a system can exist in a vacuum. You can't have an organ in your body that isn't connected to anything else. In order to achieve its function, it has to be interconnected with everything else. So that's why all of these elements need to be either being fed from something or feeding into something in order to be an integrated part of the system. So I think because we have a few minutes before we end, I think this is a great place to end. Valga la redundancia. Do you want to?
Yeah, no.
I think
it's been a great journey to get all our interconnections, and as Alejandra said, we spent pretty much 3 hours 40 minutes in it, and it is the more time intensive, but because it's really critical how you connect, right? How you connect your arteries and your veins to your organs, and your muscles to your bones, etc. And so everything works properly. And when we find those gaps, then we need to put a mitigation. So it's something really interesting to see the whole brainstorming now putting some more order, all interconnected, and in the future weeks you're going to see how this will be converging more into a project structure, and from there in a plan of itself.
So next week we'll do, as Lizzie said, we'll work on organizing all of this into a work breakdown structure. So in order to have the relationships organized in sort of a different visual, and then we will work to translate that structure into an actual, what we call a project charter. So it'd be the actual guidance of how we're going to carry out doing all that we explained in these connections. So I will, next time, it'll be next Monday. That will be Monday,
the 25th.
May 25th, at 11 a.m. Netherlands time, so UTC +2. If you need support or are looking to develop a specific idea, project, or strategy, we offer office hours every week, and the link to sign up is in the description. And we're planning our first ipsicafé special event for the second half of the year. So follow us on our LinkedIn pages to stay up to date on that. And without anything else, get some rest. Y hasta la próxima.
Bye. Ciao.
Ciao.